Good morning to all. I am Dr. Subbayya, pediatrician. So what's new in neonatology? So today I am going to discuss about summary of neonatal resuscitation from 2020 American Heart Association guidelines. So what is neonatal resuscitation? To revive or restore life to a baby from the state of asphyxia. So can resuscitation be done in a place where oxygen is not available? Yes, because adequate ventilation is more important than additional oxygen. Can resuscitation be done in a place where laryngoscope endotracheal tubes are not available? Yes, because quick action with bag and mask ventilation is more important than intubation. So what's the most common cause of failed resuscitation? So not ventilating effectively. So with this small introduction, we can go to the resuscitation guidelines. So the neonatal resuscitation algorithm remains unchanged from 2015. So recommendations for anticipating resuscitation need. Every birth should be attended by at least one person who can perform the initial steps of neonatal resuscitation and initiate positive pressure ventilation. A large observational study found that delaying positive pressure ventilation increases risk of death and prolonged hospitalization. And neonatal resuscitation training reduced stillbirths and improved 7-day neonatal survival in low-resource countries. And before every birth, a standardized risk factors assessment tool should be used to assess perinatal risk. A multi-center case control study identified 10 perinatal risk factors that predict the need for advanced neonatal resuscitation. So those that are statistically significant are late preterm infants, IUGR babies, abruptio placentae, clinical chorioamnionitis, emergency cesarean section, fetal bradycardia, forceps assisted delivery, gestational diabetes, general anesthesia, and meconium stained amniotic fluid. And before every birth, a standardized equipment checklist should be used to ensure the presence and function of supplies and equipment necessary for a complete resuscitation. Then recommendations for umbilical cord management. For preterm infants who do not require resuscitation at birth, it is reasonable to delay cord clamping for longer than 30 seconds. So these babies are less likely to receive medications for hypotension and receive transfusions, and they are associated with higher survival than early cord clamping. And for term infants who do not require resuscitation at birth, it may be reasonable to delay cord clamping for longer than 30 seconds. And they had increased hemoglobin concentration within 24 hours, increased ferritin concentration in the first 3 to 6 months, and increased polycythemia. But for infants requiring positive pressure ventilation at birth, there is currently insufficient evidence to recommend delayed cord clamping. And for infants born at less than 28 weeks of gestation, cord milking is not recommended. Then recommendations for temperature management. Admission temperature should be routinely recorded. The temperature of newborn babies should be maintained between 36.5 and 37.5 degrees centigrade. And hypothermia should be prevented because the presence and degree of hypothermia after birth is strongly associated with increased neonatal morbidity and mortality. And prevention of hypothermia is also very important because 2 observational studies found an association between hypothermia and increased morbidity and mortality in very preterm and very low birth weight neonates. And placing healthy babies who do not require resuscitation skin to skin immediately after birth improves breastfeeding, temperature control, and blood glucose stability. And for preterm and low birth weight babies, warming adjuncts like increased room temperature, skin to skin care, radiant warmers, plastic wraps, blankets, exothermic mattresses, and warmed humidified inspired gases individually or in combination may reduce the risk of hypothermia. In resource limited settings, it may be reasonable to place newborn babies in a clean plastic bag up to the level of neck and swaddle them in order to prevent hypothermia. Then recommendations for tactile stimulation and clearing the airway in newborn babies. Routine oral, nasal, oropharyngeal and endotracheal suctioning of newborn babies is not recommended even if the amniotic fluid is meconium stained, because avoiding unnecessary suctioning helps to prevent the risk of induced bradycardia as a result of suctioning of the airway. In babies who appear to have ineffective respiratory effort at birth, tactile stimulation is reasonable, and suctioning may be considered if positive pressure ventilation is required and the airway appears obstructed. For non-vigorous babies, those who are presenting with apnea or ineffective breathing effort delivered through meconium stained amniotic fluid, routine laryngoscopy with or without tracheal suctioning is not recommended. But if there was evidence of airway obstruction during positive pressure ventilation, intubation and tracheal suction can be beneficial. Then assessment of heart rate during neonatal resuscitation. During resuscitation of term and preterm newborns, the use of electrocardiography for the rapid and accurate measurement of the newborn's heart rate may be reasonable. Auscultation of the precardium still remains the preferred physical examination method for initial assessment of the heart rate. Pulse oximetry and ECG remain important adjuncts to promote continuous heart rate assessment in babies needing resuscitation. Compared to ECG, pulse oximetry is both slower in detecting the heart rate and tends to be inaccurate during the first few minutes after birth. So ECG provides the most rapid and accurate measurement of newborn's heart rate at birth and during resuscitation. And during chest compressions also, an ECG should be used for the rapid and accurate assessment of heart rate. Then ventilatory support after birth. Recommendations are: in newborn babies who are gasping or apneic within 60 seconds after birth, or who are persistently bradycardiac despite appropriate initial actions, positive pressure ventilation should be provided without delay. And in newborn babies who require positive pressure ventilation, it is reasonable to use peak inflation pressure of 20 to 25 centimeter water to inflate the lung and achieve a rise in heart rate. And in newborn infants receiving positive pressure ventilation, it may be reasonable to provide positive end expiratory pressure, and excessive peak inflation pressures are potentially harmful and should be avoided. Then recommendations for rate and inspiratory time during positive pressure ventilation. It is reasonable to provide positive pressure ventilation at a rate of 40 to 60 inflations per minute, and it is reasonable to initiate positive pressure ventilation with an inspiratory time of 1 second or less. In preterm babies, the routine use of sustained inflations to initiate resuscitation is potentially harmful and should not be performed. For spontaneously breathing preterm infants who require respiratory support immediately after birth, it is reasonable to use continuous positive airway pressure rather than intubation. And recommendations for oxygen administration during neonatal resuscitation. In term and late preterm infants receiving respiratory support at birth, the initial use of 21% oxygen is reasonable. In preterm infants, it may be reasonable to begin with 21% to 30% oxygen with subsequent oxygen titration based on pulse oximetry. In term and late preterm infants, 100% oxygen should not be used because it is associated with excess mortality. Then recommendations for initiating CPR. If heart rate after birth remains at less than 60 per minute despite adequate ventilation for at least 30 seconds, initiating chest compressions is reasonable. And it may be reasonable to use higher concentrations of oxygen during chest compressions. Once return of spontaneous circulation is achieved, the supplemental oxygen concentration may be decreased based on pulse oximetry to reduce the risks associated with hyperoxia. Compression to ventilation ratio and techniques. So when providing chest compressions, it may be reasonable to repeatedly deliver 3 compressions followed by and inflation, 3:1 ratio. And when providing chest compressions, it may be reasonable to choose the two-thumb encircling hands technique over the two-finger technique, as the two-thumb encircling hands technique is associated with improved blood pressure and less provider fatigue. And recommendations for vascular access. For babies requiring vascular access at the time of delivery, the umbilical vein is the recommended route. If intravenous access is not feasible, it may be reasonable to use the intraosseous route. And recommendations for epinephrine administration in neonatal resuscitation. If the heart rate has not increased to 60 per minute or more after optimizing ventilation and chest compressions, it may be reasonable to administer intravascular epinephrine, the dose of 0.01 to 0.03 mg per kg. So in this situation, intravascular means intravenous or intraosseous. While vascular access is being obtained, it may be reasonable to administer endotracheal epinephrine at larger dose. If endotracheal epinephrine is given before vascular access is available and response is inadequate, it may be reasonable to give an intravascular dose as soon as access is obtained, regardless of the interval. And it may be reasonable to administer further doses of epinephrine every 3 to 5 minutes, preferably intravascularly if the heart rate remains less than 60 per minute. And recommendations for volume resuscitation. It may be reasonable to administer a volume expander to newborn infants with a suspected hypovolemia based on history and physical examination who remain bradycardiac despite ventilation, chest compressions and epinephrine. So recommendations for volume resuscitation. It may be reasonable to provide volume expansion with a normal saline or blood at 10 to 20 ml per kg. And recommendations for post-resuscitation care. So newborn infants who receive prolonged positive pressure ventilation or advanced resuscitation should be closely monitored after stabilization in a NICU. Newborn infants born at 36 weeks or more gestational age with evolving moderate to severe HIE should be offered therapeutic hypothermia under clearly defined protocols. And hypoglycemia is common in infants who have received advanced resuscitation and is associated with poor outcomes. So these infants should be monitored for hypoglycemia and treated appropriately. And infants with unintentional hypothermia immediately after stabilization should be rewarmed to avoid complications. And evidence suggests that warming can be done rapidly, that's 0.5 degrees centigrade per hour, or slowly, less than 0.5 degrees centigrade per hour, with no significant difference in outcomes. Caution should be taken to avoid overheating. And recommendations for withholding and discontinuing resuscitation. If the heart rate remains undetectable and all steps of resuscitation have been completed, it may be reasonable to redirect goals of care. The reasonable time frame for this change in goals of care is around 20 minutes after birth. And conditions in which non-initiation or discontinuation of resuscitation may be considered include extremely preterm birth and certain severe congenital anomalies. So take-home messages are: newborn resuscitation requires anticipation and preparation by providers who train individually and as teams. Most newborn infants do not require immediate cord clamping or resuscitation and can be evaluated and monitored during skin-to-skin contact with their mothers after birth. And inflation and ventilation of the lungs are the priority in newborn infants who need support after birth. A rise in heart rate is the most important indicator of effective ventilation and response to resuscitative interventions. Pulse oximetry is used to guide oxygen therapy and meet oxygen saturation goals. Chest compressions are provided if there is a poor heart rate response to ventilation after appropriate ventilation corrective steps, which preferably include endotracheal intubation. The heart rate response to chest compressions and medications should be monitored electrocardiographically. If the response to chest compression is poor, it may be reasonable to provide epinephrine, preferably via the intravenous route. And failure to respond to epinephrine in a newborn with a history or examination consistent with blood loss may require volume expansion. And if all these steps of resuscitation are effectively completed and there is no heart rate response by 20 minutes, redirection of care should be discussed with the team and family. Thank you.